The restaurant had 10 people at the table, and my brother had just finished a toast about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who push you toward greatness. Everyone raised their glasses. My father looked at my brother the way he had looked at him my entire life, with the open, uncomplicated pride of a man who believed he had produced something exceptional. Then my uncle asked what I had been up to lately, and the table shifted in that particular way tables shift when a question lands that everyone already knows the answer to. My mother smiled into her wine glass. My brother said, "Lauren's still figuring things out." The table laughed, the small, kind laugh people use when they are being gentle about something they consider sad. Part 1. I want to tell you what still figuring things out actually looked like. It looked like 18 months of sleeping 4 hours a night in a one-bedroom apartment in Austin with 3 monitors on a folding table and a whiteboard covering the entire east wall. It looked like 2 failed funding rounds and 1 near bankruptcy that I resolved by selling a car I loved and moving to a cheaper neighborhood without telling anyone in my family, because telling them would have produced a specific kind of sympathy I did not have the bandwidth to manage. It looked like the 3rd funding round that closed 14 months ago, and the enterprise contracts that followed, and the team of 41 people I now led across 3 time zones who were building something that was beginning to be described, in the specific language of the industry press, as infrastructure the sector had needed for a decade. That was what still figuring things out looked like. My name is Lauren. I am 34 years old. I founded a supply chain optimization platform called Veridian 4 years ago, after 8 years of working in logistics operations for companies that all had the same structural problem, and none of the right tools to address it. I had built the first version of the platform myself, with 2 engineers I had hired on deferred salaries because they believed in the concept and I had believed in them. The platform now processed routing and inventory data for 11 enterprise clients across 4 countries. We had been named in a major industry publication 3 months ago. The article had a photograph. I had not shown the article to my family. Not out of strategy, exactly. Out of something more honest than that. I had spent 34 years in a family that had categorized me in a specific and settled way, and I had learned that the categorization was not responsive to evidence. I had presented evidence before: good grades, early professional success, the competence I demonstrated consistently in every environment except the one where it was most personal. And the categorization had simply absorbed the evidence and continued. At some point I had stopped presenting evidence and started building instead, and the building had gone better than the presenting ever had. My brother is named Carter. He is 3 years older than me. He is a real estate developer in Atlanta whose success is real and whose work ethic is genuine, and who I have never resented for either of those things. What I have sat with, for 34 years, is the way his success became the family's primary narrative, and my path became the contrast that made his narrative legible. You need a shadow to show where the light falls. I was the shadow. Carter's engagement to a woman named Priya had been announced 2 weeks earlier. The dinner was at a restaurant he had chosen, a good one, the kind of place with ambient lighting and a wine list that requires the sommelier's involvement. Priya was warm and direct and asked genuine questions of everyone at the table, which I registered as a quality I respected and which would become relevant later in ways I had not anticipated. My father had started the evening by saying how proud he was. He said it first about Carter's engagement, and then about the new development Carter's firm was breaking ground on in Buckhead, and then, when he arrived at me in the rotation of his attention, he said he was proud of everyone at the table and moved on before the sentence fully landed. I had watched him do this my entire life. The acknowledgement that existed as a formality. The inclusion that was technically present and substantively absent. My mother asked if I was still doing the tech thing. The tech thing. I had founded a company, secured venture capital, built a team of 41 people, and negotiated enterprise contracts with clients whose logistics budgets exceeded some national GDPs. And my mother, at a restaurant table, called it the tech thing with the mild and loving dismissiveness she reserved for hobbies she did not fully understand and did not need to understand because they were mine and therefore manageable in their significance. I said yes. Still doing the tech thing. She nodded and turned to ask Carter about the wedding venue. I picked up my wine glass and looked across the table at Priya, who was listening to Carter with the attentive expression of someone who was also, simultaneously, paying attention to something else in the room. She had the quality of a person who processed more than she indicated, and she had been looking at me periodically throughout the evening with a focused curiosity that I had noticed and not yet understood. I understood it about 40 minutes later. The evening settled into its rhythm. Appetizers. The kind of conversation that moves around a table in predictable arcs. Carter's project timeline, the wedding's preliminary guest list, my uncle's recent golf trip, my parents' plan to visit Savannah in the fall. I participated where participation was natural and sat with my wine where it was not. I had learned to do this over many years of family dinners. How to be present without requiring the table to accommodate anything inconvenient about my presence. My father made a joke about my apartment. He did not mean it unkindly. That is the thing I always want to clarify when I describe these moments, because the unkindness was never the point and framing it that way would miss what was actually happening. He mentioned that I had moved apartments again and said, "Lauren collects zip codes the way other people collect stamps," and the table laughed and I smiled because the smile was easier than the alternative, and because I had genuinely moved 3 times in 4 years and the joke had a factual foundation even if the implication beneath it, instability, lack of direction, the wandering of someone without a fixed plan, was not accurate. The moves had been strategic. Austin for the founding team. A cheaper neighborhood when capital was tight. Back to a better space when the first enterprise contract closed. Each move had been a response to a business condition, not a symptom of a life without direction. But explaining that would have required a conversation I was not having. I had not been having that conversation for years. The pattern that produced my father's joke had been producing variations of that joke since I was approximately 19 years old and had decided, at the end of my first year of university, to change my major from pre-law to operations and systems design. My father had said, "Systems design," and then he had looked at my mother and the look contained an entire conversation they had decided not to have out loud. My mother had said she was sure it would work out. At 22 I had passed on a conventional graduate program to take a job with a regional freight company that nobody at the table had heard of. My father had said, "Freight," and then asked Carter about his internship. At 25 I had left that job to join a startup that failed 18 months later, and I had absorbed the failure with the same efficiency I brought to everything and found the next position, and the one after that and built the knowledge base that eventually became the foundation of Viridian. During those years, my family had developed a settled interpretation of what my professional life represented. Searching. Trying things. The portrait of a person who was competent enough in isolated moments, but could not find her footing in any sustained way. It was not a cruel portrait. It was built from genuinely incomplete information and filtered through the expectations of people who measured success in the legible, conventional forms, titles, organizations with recognizable names, the kind of career that could be summarized in one sentence at a dinner table. Viridian could not be summarized in one sentence. Not because it was complicated to explain, but because explaining it required a listener who understood the problem it was solving, and the problem it was solving lived in the operational infrastructure of global commerce in a way that was significant to the people inside that world and largely invisible to everyone outside it. My family was outside it. I had not tried to bring them in. My uncle asked, over the main course, whether I had thought about settling somewhere permanently. He said it with the gentle persistence of someone who believed the question was kind. I said I was pretty settled in Austin. He said, but is there a plan? He said it the way people say it when they mean, is there a plan I would recognize as a plan? I said yes. There was a plan. Carter said, Lauren's always had plans. She's just not great at the follow-through. He said it with the easy affection of an older sibling who believed he was being accurate rather than cutting. The table received it the way the table received most things said in that register, as a gentle, harmless observation from someone who knew me well. Priya was looking at me. Not the way the rest of the table was looking at me. With a focused, slightly altered attention that I had seen before in professional settings, the look of someone who has just connected a name to a context and is deciding what to do with the connection. She picked up her phone. She looked at it for 30 seconds. Then she looked up at me and said, Viridian. That's you, isn't it? Part 3. The table did not react immediately. Priya's question landed in the middle of a conversation that had been moving in a different direction, and it took a moment for the words to register, as significant rather than as a non sequitur. My uncle was still holding his fork. My mother had her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Carter looked at his fiancée with the mildly confused expression of a man who had not yet caught up to what she was asking or why she was asking it. I looked at Priya. I said, yes. That's me. She set her phone face up on the table. The screen was open to the industry article. The one with the photograph. I had not looked at that photograph often because I did not have a strong relationship with photographs of myself in professional contexts, but I had seen it enough to know what she was holding, a full-page feature, in a publication that covered supply chain technology and infrastructure investment, with a headline about next-generation logistics platforms, and my name in the subheading and a figure in the body of the article that represented Viridian's current contracted revenue. Priya had been working in venture capital for 6 years. I had not known this before the dinner. I knew it now because she said it in the same breath as my name, the way people contextually identify themselves when they realize a conversation has suddenly become professional. She said, I read this 3 months ago. I've been trying to get a meeting with your team. My father looked at the phone. My mother looked at my father. Carter looked at Priya and then at me and then at the phone with the specific expression of someone revising a file they believed was complete. My uncle said, What is this? Priya said, Lauren's company was named one of the top emerging logistics platforms in the sector. She said it plainly, with the matter-of-fact quality of someone reporting information rather than making an argument. She was not doing it for drama. She was a professional who had just identified a relevant professional connection and was responding to it naturally, without awareness that the identification was reorganizing the entire table's understanding of the evening. She said the revenue figure aloud. The table absorbed it in the particular silence of a room where a number has been said that does not fit the existing narrative, and everyone is recalculating simultaneously. My father said, Lauren. I looked at him. He said, Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that question for a moment before answering because I wanted to answer it honestly rather than deflect. I said, I've been building it. I didn't want to talk about it until it was real enough to talk about. My mother said, But this is, she gestured at Priya's phone, at the article, at the number that was still on the screen. She did not finish the sentence. She did not have a word for what it was that fit comfortably inside the version of me she had been carrying. Carter said nothing. He was still looking at the phone with the expression that had started as confusion and had moved into something more complicated. Carter was not a man who processed things slowly. He was processing this slowly because processing it at normal speed would require him to arrive at a conclusion that reorganized 34 years of a sibling dynamic he had been the primary beneficiary of. I did not feel triumph. I want to be precise about that because the story might suggest I should have, and I did not. What I felt was something quieter and less satisfying than triumph, and more durable. A kind of completion. The specific feeling of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has set it down not because someone else lifted it from her but because she had simply walked far enough that it no longer made sense to keep holding it. Priya asked me 2 professional questions. Genuine ones, the kind that come from someone who has read deeply rather than skimmed. I answered them. We talked for 5 minutes about routing infrastructure and the specific inefficiency my platform addressed, and the conversation had the quality of 2 people in the same field finding their common language, which it was. The rest of the table was quiet while we talked. Not the comfortable quiet of a dinner table that has paused on a topic. The particular quiet of people who are sitting inside a recalibration they have not finished making. My father's hands were flat on the table. My mother was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before and could not immediately name. It was not pride exactly. It was closer to the expression of someone who has found something in a room they did not know was there and is uncertain what to do with it. Carter said, Priya, how did you know about this? She said, it was in every major publication in my field, Carter. He said nothing after that. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip. I looked at the table and I felt the complete and quiet arrival of something I had not been waiting for, but had been building toward for 4 years without naming it. I did not need them to understand. I just needed to be done waiting for them to. I stayed for dessert. I want to be clear about this because leaving dramatically after the reveal would have been a different story, one about making a point rather than finishing a meal. I stayed because the dessert menu had something I wanted and because Thomas, which is to say the evening, had not asked anything of me that required an exit. I was not performing composure. I was simply composed. Those are different things and the difference matters. The table had not returned to its earlier rhythm. That rhythm was gone and would not be coming back. What replaced it was a careful, slightly formal version of dinner conversation, the kind that occurs when everyone present is aware that something has shifted and nobody has yet decided how to speak inside the new configuration. My father asked Priya follow-up questions about venture capital in a tone that was more attentive than anything he had directed at me all evening. My mother asked me, twice, questions about Viridian that were real questions, the kind that required actual answers rather than the polite maintenance of a conversation. I answered them. Clearly, without embellishment, in the same voice I used in any professional context. Carter said very little for the rest of the evening. This was not his usual mode. Carter was comfortable at tables. He was the one who kept conversation moving, who made the room warm, who had a story ready for any pause. The silence from his direction was its own kind of information. I did not press it. I did not look at him in a way that invited a response. I let him be wherever he was and I attended to my dessert and the conversation that was happening, and I was present in the easy, unburdened way I had not quite managed all evening before Priya placed her phone on the table. Priya asked before we left whether she could have my contact information. She said it directly, as a professional request, with the clean simplicity of someone who did not need to frame it as anything other than what it was. I gave her my card. She looked at it and said, I'll reach out this week. I said I looked forward to it. My father walked me to my car. This was not something he normally did. He was a man who said good night at the table and let people find their own way out, which was its own small version of a larger pattern. He walked beside me across the parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the October air doing what October air does in Georgia, cool enough to feel like a shift, not cold enough to require anything. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I should have asked more." I looked at him. He was not a man who said things like that. He was a man who moved forward and assumed the people around him were moving forward too, and did not often stop to examine the assumptions embedded in the moving. This was as close as he was likely to get, in a parking lot in October, to saying what he was trying to say. I said, "Yes. You should have." Not to wound him. Because it was true and because the truth, said plainly and without heat, was the only version I was willing to offer. I was done with the other versions. The version where I minimized to protect his comfort. The version where I said it's fine when it wasn't. The version where I absorbed the cost of his inattention and called it understanding. He nodded. He said good night. He hugged me briefly, and the hug had something in it that the hugs at that table usually didn't, which I received and did not analyze and filed in the place where I kept things that were real but not yet fully formed. I drove home. The Austin apartment was quiet when I got in. I had a flight back the following morning and I had packed the night before, which was a habit I had developed in a period of my life when the mornings after family events required me to leave with more efficiency than emotion allowed. I made tea. I sat at the drafting table I still kept by the east window, a relic from the early days when the whiteboard was on the wall and the company was a concept I was willing to lose sleep over. The whiteboard was gone now. The monitors had been replaced with better ones. The folding table was long gone, and in its place was a proper desk with good drawers, and a surface wide enough to work on with intention. The apartment looked like what it was, the home of someone who had built something real and was continuing to build it, one day after the next, without fanfare, or announcement, or anyone's permission. I thought about Priya's phone on the table. The article on the screen. The specific silence of 10 people recalibrating. I had not planned that moment. I had not arranged the dinner, or the article, or the timing of Priya's employment history. I had simply built a company and attended a dinner, and those two facts had encountered each other in a restaurant in Atlanta, and produced a consequence I had not needed, and had also not been able to prevent. That was the thing about building something real. It eventually became visible, on its own terms regardless of whether you announced it. The work was its own announcement. The contracts and the clients and the 41 people across 3 time zones who came to work every day on a problem worth solving, those were the announcement. Not a speech at a dinner table. Not a conversation I had engineered to prove a point to people who had been making the wrong point for 34 years. Just the work. Accumulated, documented, undeniable. Priya's email arrived 2 days after I returned to Austin. She wrote the way she spoke, directly, specifically, without preamble. She said she had reviewed Viridian's public materials thoroughly since the dinner, and that her fund was interested in a conversation about a potential Series B investment. She named a range. It was a serious range. The kind of number that changes the shape of what a company can become in the next 3 years. I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to our head of finance with a note that said, "Let's talk this week." Then I went back to work. Carter texted me the week after the dinner. A short message, the kind that takes several drafts to become that short. He said he hadn't realized and that he was sorry for the comment at dinner, and that he hoped we could talk when I was next in Atlanta. I read the message on a Tuesday morning between 2 calls and I wrote back 3 sentences. I said I appreciated him saying that. I said the comment was fine. I said I would be in Atlanta in November and we could have dinner. I meant all 3 sentences, including the middle one. The comment was fine in the sense that it no longer had the weight it would have had before Viridian existed and before I had built enough of my own life that other people's assessments of it had diminished to their correct proportion. It had landed in a room where I was no longer the person it was aimed at. That was not forgiveness as a performance. It was just accuracy. My team shipped a major platform update in November. The kind that took 8 months of development and resolved a routing inefficiency that 3 of our enterprise clients had been working around for years. I was on a video call with the lead engineer when the deployment confirmed, and we both sat there for a moment in the specific satisfaction of people who have solved something real. She said, "We did it." I said, "We did." That was the whole of it. No table. No wine glasses raised. No family in the front row. Just 2 people on a screen, in different time zones, in the middle of a Tuesday, having made something that worked. I thought about my father in the parking lot. His hands in his pockets. The thing he had said that was as close as he could get to what he meant. I thought about the whiteboard on the east wall, and the 4 hours of sleep and the car I had sold and the contract that had made the next apartment possible, and every step between that folding table and the desk I was sitting at now. I thought about all of it for a moment.